Hello and welcome to After Sound Review, and this time I will review a quite unique IM because it gets hype maybe only in Indonesia, and it is only happen because there's a clearance sale of this IM, and this is the DBE PR500. DBE is an abbreviation for Don't Blame Your Ears, and yes, this is an Indonesian brand, so maybe it is not sold overseas, or maybe you will finding a hard time to find them. Okay, so first of all, thank you for Bro Fahrul Aditya for sending me this IM so I could review it. And like usual, I will review them from the build, fit, frequency response, sounds, and comparisons. When it comes to the price and specification, it is using 3 dynamic drivers, and it is sold at normal price around 30 bucks, but it is now in clearance sale and it is less than 10 bucks, so it is very cheap. Okay, when it comes to the build quality, I gotta say that it is looks and feels cheap. Yes, they don't look convincing. The plastic is all very light and doesn't have any real weight to it, even though it is using 3 dynamic drivers, but it is really light. And the faceplate is, yeah, it just looks like made of cheap plastic, and you can see that the housing itself, yeah, it just looks quite empty. The plastic is not really hard plastic or the very strong plastic one. It's just normal cheap looking plastic, and it is using I think this is quite a poor quality MMCX. It's not, I could rotate it very easily. It doesn't feel very convincing, honestly. And the cable itself, it just looks like one of the KZ. So yes, from the housing and from the cable itself, it looks definitely cheap. And when it comes to the fitting alone, this is quite unique because yes, I do have small Asian ears, and whenever I use the stock ear tips, I actually couldn't really get the fit. I couldn't really get the noise isolation here, so I need to change them. And let me tell you, when I do get a proper fit, when I do get a proper isolation, the sound is so damn strange, so I couldn't really enjoy it. But instead, I quite enjoy it when I'm using the stock ear tips, even though I don't really get that sound isolation here. So okay, when it comes to the sound, I will use my FX DSD, Qdlix 5K, and also iBasso DX160 as my source. And here's my song list. So yeah, when it comes to the frequency response, I could simply consider the DBE PR500 is considered as V-shape warm, yes. But let me tell you, from what I hear and from what my friends hear using the stock ear tips, the sound is more focused on the mid-range alone, and it could be explained in this measurement thanks to how big the elevation in the mid-range, and how the stock ear tips is not really quite good, and it's not really sealing, so you don't really get this sub bass here. Even though when I try to change it with Final Audio Type E, I could definitely hear the sub bass, but that's still in a subdued manner and it's not really punchy still. And overall, the tonal balance is kinda strange when you add that bass. So yeah, I do like the stock ear tips more, even though I don't really get that bass punch. So the most thing you will hear that is around this mid-range, and after the mid-range area, you will see that there's a huge dip in the 6K, so you definitely get that the cymbal crash or the violin or the something like that. You don't really hear a lot of shimmering treble around that area. And this part is the frequency resonance response from the coupler. So yeah, what I'm trying to say here, that definitely the most part you will hear that is coming around this area alone. And then when I compare them with the Harman IM, definitely the Harman IM like Moondrop KXSS looks more mature. It looks more not as mountain and valley as the DBE PR500. Thus you can hear the bass more, and you hear the vocal and treble in a more balanced manner. This is the DF neutral, the Swanergy X01. As you can see, that's why I still categorize this DBE as V-shape, even though when you hear it, maybe you can consider it not as V-shape but more as a A-shape, maybe, thanks to how focused the mid-range is. The elevation is mostly on the mid-range area. So as you have seen through the frequency response that I've showed you, that this IM simply could be described as a V-shape, but not your usual V-shape where the emphasis is more on the bass and the treble, but the emphasis is more on the sub-bass, and in the upper mid-range, which is very, it's like a mountain in the upper mid-range area. It's around the 2 kHz to 5 kHz area, and then there's a huge dip from the 5 to 6K. So yeah, but let me tell you, for what I perceive in my ears through this ear tips, trust me that the bass it's not really punchy, and it never gets satisfying. It never could satisfy my thirst for bass thump or bass punch. It just feels really weak, although it is deep. So for you who are bass heads, I assure you that you don't wanna try this one. And if I change the ear tips to a more bassier one, like the Vinyl Audio Type E ear tips, I could definitely get a lot more bass, but in return, the vocal gets a little bit overwhelmed, and somehow it's kind of squishy. So it's just not as balanced as this ear tips, although you will definitely missing some bass steps there. And when it comes to the mid-range, for me this is a quiet, I'm not saying that it is good or bad, but it's like it is made for some specific genre. So the more specific area where you get this upper mid-range emphasis is definitely on the 2 to 3 kHz, and then you get that really huge valley deep around the 5 to 6K. So in return, you will get that very forward sounding upper mid-range that sounds quite thin, but never gets sibilance nor ever gets sharp to my ears thanks to the 5 to 6K dip. But it's just like it is made for specific genres or songs, like for acoustic. So maybe if you know the Joyce Chu or Cindian, some songs using only guitar and the female vocals like Yui, it all has Asian female sweet but quite thin sounding vocal. It will definitely good for those kind of vocal female. But for you who enjoy thick female vocal like Adele or Diana Krall, or maybe even male vocal like Il Divo or Josh Groban, it definitely will sound squished, you know. For example, just like when I'm talking like this and I'm changing it to talking like this, this is what happens when you hear those notes, when you hear those voices. It's just a little bit more squished and more head voice-y, you know. It's like the head voice when you're singing. So it just, you hear it like this. It's not really natural. It's not as thick as you supposed to hear. And when it comes to the treble itself is never get emphasized. It's just right behind the vocal, and yeah, it's not really emphasized, so you don't really get a lot of energy from the treble, like the hi-hat, cymbal crash, or saxophone or trumpet. You don't get a lot of that energy there. So it's just only made for vocal. Quite strange, and not every vocal even, it's just for acoustic vocal for me. And the technical performance itself is not really great. The soundstage feels small, and the separation, it is quite good but not really detailed thanks to the huge dip in the lower mid-range and also around the lower treble area, so yeah, you don't really get a lot of detail on that area. And then when it comes to the comparison, this KKZ VK4 is definitely more bassy, and somehow the vocal is definitely more balanced for me. The female vocal or male vocal could sound more fuller and more balanced with more bass there, but the separation is just better in the DBE PR500. Also, when it comes to the EDX, EDX sounds more V-shaped with more recessed vocal and bigger bass, much bigger bass, also more prominent treble area. And you know, this Sony MH755 is still like a gold to me in the price area. If you get a real one, which is actually below 10 bucks, this is real gold. This is simply the best I've ever tried, but there's a lot of fake out there, and the only way to really sure that this is real one is to measure it. So I'm not really recommend you to try hard and find the real one, because it's hard to tell. And is it worth the price if it's not on discount, so it will price close to like the KZ Zs10 Pro? For me, it is definitely not. The KZ Zs10 Pro is definitely on the higher level. It is much more separated, it is much more detailed, and the soundstage and overall sound is definitely still better. It's just maybe the tonality, because I cannot judge the tonal. A lot of people have their own tonal preferences. The KZ Zs10 Pro is definitely feels more V-shape-ish, but for me it is somehow a little bit more balanced, because the DBE PR500, despite of its sub bass, for me the main attraction, the main force, the main power of it, the main, you know, the good point of the PR500 is the unique vocal presentation. So that's all from me. I hope you like it, and if you have any question, please write down in the comments below, and see you next time. Bye bye.